My name is Josh, and this is Tech Analytical. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to my $1,000 PC build for the month of February 2017. This video is for educational purposes, but it'll also serve as my application for the guys over at Elite Gaming Computers for their Scholarship for Gamers. So let's jump right in. The way I design my PC builds is I start with a budget-oriented build and then match things so that parts will be upgradable potentially in the future. And what's interesting about the Kaby Lake processors is the i7 7700K processor. It is an LGA 1151 socket, which is the same socket as the i5 7600K, which is interesting because essentially that means that you can buy the same motherboard, and as soon as you want to upgrade to the i7, you can do that just by, throw it in right into your build. So if we look up the i7 7700K, of course this one is a little bit more expensive, but I mean, it does have 4.20 gigahertz of quad-core processing power. So between both of the builds, there were some parts that were the same, so I want to go over those first. The Hyper 212 Evo CPU cooler is pretty standard, but for the higher budget-oriented build, there's the potential, of course, to go to liquid cooling solution. As far as the RAM goes, I used the G.Skill Ripjaw V-Series. It's a 16 gigabyte 2.6 RAM kit. Very nice RAM. It's DDR4 3000, and it's a class 15 RAM. So that's pretty nice. The storage solutions were almost the same for both builds. I went with a Western Digital Caviar Blue 1 terabyte hard drive, 7200 RPMs, which is actually really nice. And I was really pushing for the 7200 RPMs. As far as the SSD, on the lower ended build, there's barely enough room for an SSD. I would even go down to, say, only like a 20 gig SSD, just because for the sake of the for the build. But I did go with the SanDisk SSD plus 120 gigabyte. Lastly, we have the power supply, which is the Roswell 700 watt 80 plus bronze certified semi-modular power supply. Of course, 700 watts of power is completely overkill for this build. I suppose if you wanted to save $20, there's really not any efficient power supply under really the $50 range. This one is the 600 watt power supply from Roswell, and that one's still $50, and just like the $5 extra for a whole another 100 watts. It's just kind of insane. Now, as far as I want to talk about the case for a little bit, because cases have always been a little bit optional for me. I kind of build my own cases and do all kinds of stuff like that. And for me, I wouldn't actually get a case probably. If I did, I would get something like a test bench, or something like this Apevia X QPAC 3 OG. It's a micro ATX mini tower case. You can't use this one with the motherboard from the smaller build, but I'll explain that in a little bit detail. It's a nice looking case. It has some interesting features, and it's a carry around size case. Now that we have the cooling, the RAM, the storage, and the power supply all out of the way, let's focus on the true heart of what I would say any computer build, which is the CPU, the GPU, and the motherboard. So for the base build, I went with the i5 7600. What I've chosen for the graphics card for this build is the GeForce GTX 1060 6GB video card. This card is not a bad card at all. This card is really nice for regular gaming. But for me personally, I'm kind of a workstation PC builder, just because I do things in After Effects and Adobe Premiere, and I do some 3D rendering and all kinds of stuff like that. So the 1060 is perfect. It's lovely for gaming. Absolutely, absolutely lovely. This is the motherboard that I went with for this build because, well, for a lot of reasons. I like the way it looks, first off. It is two-way SLI compatible, and you can have up to 64 gigabytes of RAM. And it does have USB-C, which is all things that I really, really appreciate. So let's move on to the higher-end upgradable options. So what we have here, I didn't change the CPU for budget-oriented purposes, and we can actually do that in a second, and I'll show you. It's only about $100 more. Not completely. I relatively cheaped out on the motherboard. I went for a micro ATX motherboard. The interesting thing about this board, here, let me show you the name. It's the Asrock Z170 Extreme4 micro ATX LG1151 motherboard. The thing with this motherboard, it can support two-way SLI. It can support 65 gigabytes of RAM. It has USB-C, and I mean, it's like an overclocking motherboard. You can do that kind of stuff with this motherboard. It doesn't have like fancy bells and whistles. It's not like a big motherboard like the other one, but I don't know that it's necessarily important to have that stuff if you can pack in a GTX 1070 graphics card into this gaming $1,000 build, which I think is incredible, actually, because essentially here we have a GeForce GTX 1070, a Asrock Z170 Extreme4 motherboard, and we have the 7700K. Here, let me quickly plug that in. Right now, I mean, you can use the same processor, but if you just add this i7 right into the build, it is okay. It's a $1,200 build, and that's $200 for an i7, a 1070, and basically a small form factor motherboard that can do all of the same things. So that's my $1,000 gaming build for February 2017. Keep in mind, every PC user is unique and individual in their own ways, and you will have unique situations building your own computers. So take this with a grain of salt. I think it is very interesting that Intel came out with the 7700K Kaby Lake processors, which again, they have, it's a quad-core 4.2 gigahertz with a boost up to, I think, 4.5 or so. No, I think it was 4.8. It's really high. It's a really nice processor, especially, I think, for the money, and for, especially in this build, how much of an increase, I think how much better performance you're going to get from, you know, an i7 and the 1070 compared to this budget build for only $200. That's the key thing. I mean, yes, it's a fourth of your $1,000 build. It's 20% more for this i7 and the 1070, but I think, in my opinion, I think it's definitely worth it. And that's something that you can upgrade to as time goes by. Anyway, thank you for watching. This has been my $1,000 2017 February PC build guide. My name's Tech Analytical, and I'll see you in a month.